Hey guys, welcome back to Honey in the Rock episode 45. I'm Sophie, and today I have a special guest. This is Lydia.
Hello.
So, like I did, you probably heard her story on the news at the beginning of June. She was valedictorian, is that the right one?
Yes.
Okay. Of her school, and in her speech at graduation, she talked about God and was just giving God all the glory, and the news picked it up, and it was just super cool to see the God being shared on the news, and then she was interviewed, and it was just picked up, and I was like, wait, I need to talk to this girl. So I reached out to her, and thankfully she said yes. And so thank you for being here and making the drive down here. I'm just so excited to talk to you.
Yeah.
But I just told her, it was like, we probably met, 30 minutes ago?
Yeah.
And I was like, we haven't stopped talking. I feel like I've known her. She's going to Anderson. I was like, I want to go to Anderson.
Yeah,
I'm just going to come see you.
Do it.
All the things. So, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
But how I start out with every guest is asking them what's their story/testimony. So if you don't mind sharing yours.
Of course.
We'd love to hear.
Yeah, so my dad is a pastor at First Baptist, and then my mom was a biblical counselor. So I kind of grew up in the church.
Yeah.
I was always there. If the doors were open, that's where I was.
Yes.
It was kind of an expectation, but like also I loved being there. Loved the community. So that was kind of what my childhood was like. I was saved and baptized when I was in first grade, which was very early, but I, again, don't think I had like a full comprehension of what I was doing when I got baptized or even when I accepted Christ. It was more of like what I thought I was supposed to do.
Right.
And then for many years, I just kind of went through the motions of being a Christian. I read my Bible, I memorized the scripture, but I kind of did that more to just, like check off a box.
Right.
Because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. But then in middle school, I went to a church retreat, and they kind of talked about the difference between going through the motions in your relationship with God and then actually having like a true relationship with God. And that's when it kind of finally clicked for me around like 8th grade. And then I kind of actually started to focus on my relationship with God and like actually having a connection with Him. And so that's how it was up until my junior year. And then what I kind of talked about in my speech the day before my junior year started, my mom passed away. And when that happened, my relationship with God got really rocky. I had a lot of questions and just like a lot of doubts, and a lot of anger, both towards my mom and towards God for everything that happened. And so for about a year after that, I struggled really hard in my relationship with God, and it wasn't very good at all. But over time, with a lot of love and support from my friends, my family, and just my community, I kind of finally realized that God's goodness wasn't really dependent on my circumstances. I realized that no matter what I go through, whether that's something that's really great or something that's really hard, like losing my mom, that God is still good and that He's still faithful, even when I don't understand it. And since then, I've still been learning from that, and my relationship with God has grown a lot. But that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So. That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. That's what I've been learning recently. Is we can't define God off of our circumstances.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because our circumstances are from a sinful world.
That's
we live in a sinful world, and so, but that is like so wise and mature of you to already realize that in such a hard thing.
Right.
Like you had all the reason to be super angry at God, and like, what the heck is wrong with you? Like, why would you leave me? Why would you forsake me? But just already be able to see that He's still a good God, even when life is not. Oh my goodness, you're already preaching here. So, being number one in your class, how was that? Well, let me rephrase that. How was that important? What was the most important part of that? Being number one in the class. That seems kind of silly, but I think a lot of people like strive for that, and then maybe when you get to the top, it's not all that you thought it was.
No, it's not.
Or all these things. But being at the top, how can that still be important and used for good?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me was, okay, so let me try to make this make sense. So when my mom passed away, I spoke at her funeral. And prior to her passing, I absolutely hated talking in front of people, despised it. Like public speaking was not my strong suit at all. It made me so uncomfortable. I never raised my hand in class. So for me, the biggest thing about being number one was just getting to speak in front of everyone. And so that was, right after I spoke at my mom's funeral, I was like, okay, I want to be number one so I can speak at graduation, because I want to be able to talk to all of these people about what I've learned because of it. But then also, I think another big part of being number one for me was just proving that I was capable of it, especially post my mom passing away. because there were many days when I didn't even want to get out of bed.
Right.
Lots of days where I was like, why am I still doing this? Why do I keep trying? But I think it was just reminding myself over and over again that this is what God wants me to do, and this is what my mom would want me to do. She wouldn't want me to just like quit.
Right.
So just perseverance, determination, like things like that. I've spent a lot of years in my education striving for perfection, which is also what I talked about in my speech. So it was very difficult, and it's definitely not all that it like is like shown to be.
Right.
Being number one is a huge accomplishment, but it doesn't satisfy you. Like I didn't get anything from it. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a part of it where you put your identity in. And if you're putting your identity in being number one or being the fastest runner or the best basketball player, it's gonna end up falling because now you've graduated and you're gonna go to college. And you're gonna be in the mix with everybody again. Or you're gonna be number one runner in high school, and then you're gonna go to a good college and someone's gonna beat you. So
that's right.
But then so when you put your identity in those things, it's gonna let you down. But I think what's just so cool about your story, and even just knowing you for a little bit and seeing these things about you, it was so clear that wasn't what your identity was found in, and that you were able to use the platform that you were given and worked for good, and to share the gospel and share the goodness of God. So that was just like so cool. I worded that question really weird. I should have just read it right off my paper, but instead I tried to read it off my head and it just didn't work. So were you feeling nervous to be bold and talk about Jesus in your speech?
Yes, actually. So I was very hesitant for a long time about whether or not I wanted to talk about Jesus, because for me the biggest thing was I graduated from a public school, and I wasn't sure how people would react to me talking about Jesus. And then also most people in my school know that I'm a Christian, and so I was also kind of worried of their perception of me of like, oh, of course she was going to talk about Jesus. But I had a lot of good conversations with friends kind of when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about. And one person in particular, when I told them I really wanted to talk more about Jesus, they were like, well, why wouldn't you? And I was like, well, that's a good point. I don't know why I wouldn't. And they told me to be bold in my faith, because that's what Jesus calls us to do. And they told me, when are you going to have another opportunity to speak in front of thousands of people? And that's a really good point. I probably won't. So like, why would I not talk about Jesus? And because it's the center of my life, and it's the center of everything that I do, or at least I try to make it the center of my life. It would make sense for me to want to talk about Jesus.
Right. And then going into talking, were you just like so nervous just because you're talking in front of that many people?
Okay.
Or were you just like had this like calmness of you?
I think the months leading up, like while I was writing my speech and then when it was done and while I was practicing, I was very nervous. But honestly, like the day of and going up there, like a little jittery, but I just kept praying. And like my favorite verse is like Philippians 4, verse 6-7, like do not be anxious about anything. Yeah, that one. And so I just like would recite that to me, like myself over and over again. And like because of that, I felt like the overwhelming peace of God, because that's what He promises He will give you if you ask for it. So yeah, no.
Okay, so that's so cool. I think the one thing about being known as that Christian girl at school is a weird title to have. I think I kind of had that at school too, and it is weird because it's like, are you making fun of me, or are you being at school?
Literally,
like I don't know. And so I just like go with it, but I'm like, I'm pretty sure you guys are all making fun of me, but that's kind of like, okay, then you see that in my life, and I'm like, oh,
that's kind of a good thing. Exactly.
I'm like, thank you for pouring out of me in that way. So that is kind of funny, but I just think you got so much feedback that was just so good. And I'm sure someone out there is like, why would you do that? But the main part was just like so encouraging. And it was just encouraging to see it on the news and all over these platforms that often have so much negative or against God. And I think it's just really encouraging to see a young girl proclaiming her faith and being bold about it, and then people like reacting pretty well to it. So I'm just so encouraged by you doing that. I'm super amazed. I've also found that when I'm going to talk about Jesus, I'm not as nervous. But when I'm like presenting a project at school, I'm like shaking. It sounds like I'm crying. But then like I can just go up and talk about Jesus, because the whole time I'm like, Lord, give me peace. Lord, like
speak through me.
Speak through me. You get the glory. Like, please, Lord. And through that, He gives so much peace, because I feel like I'm confident in what I'm talking about. Because everything else when I'm talking doesn't make sense. I'm like, this is just a random project.
I made this. I don't even know what I'm saying.
But then through that, it's that peace. And then this was not a question on, but I really liked how you said that overwhelming peace, that undescribable peace that the Lord brings you. And I think that is just something that's so true. And it's kind of, you can't really describe it.
Right.
And I'm sure you've probably felt this in many different ways in your life,
Yeah.
but just peace. It's like, I shouldn't have peace right now, but somehow I have peace. And it's because of the Lord. And then you try to explain that peace.
Goosebumps.
And you're trying to explain that peace to somebody and you can't.
Right.
Like,
no, you
I
literally
can't tell
can't.
you how I had peace through this terrible situation. The worst happened. And I have peace right now. And it's only because of the Lord. And He promises that peace when you ask for it. And so I just think that is so cool that it's been through that as well, just like speaking about Jesus and being bold in that.
Yeah.
So, as we've already said, you're going to Anderson next year. Do you have any plans already set up to keep Jesus first as you go into college in a new area? Do you have any plans like you're already like, this is what I'm going to do to make sure Jesus stays first in my life?
Yeah, so obviously I want to get plugged in with the church. I think I don't really know what that's going to look like yet. I have a lot of churches in mind up in Anderson. But then for like personally, for me, setting aside time to do time with Jesus, like spend time with Jesus, can be really difficult, especially because I'm a really busy person. So I really want to go in with the mindset of intentionally setting aside time for Jesus, whether that's in the mornings, afternoons. What I've learned, honestly, over the years is if I tell myself that I'm going to do it every morning, I don't do it. I need to work it into my schedule, as in like when I have time, like free time. Usually it's the night or even like in between, like I come home from something and I have like an hour, then I'll do it. So I think that I need to make sure that I'm really intentional spending time with Jesus, because if you don't do that, like if you don't know God's voice, how are you going to hear God's voice? If you don't spend time with God, like how are you going to show God's love to other people? But then also there's a lot of awesome opportunities at Anderson. Like BCM, like things like that I really want to get plugged into. So I'm going to a Christian school, so I think it will be like pretty helpful to be there and to be able to keep God at the center. So
that's so good. Obviously, I haven't made that transition yet,
right.
But I do think from people I've heard, this is a crucial time in your life.
Yes.
And you're either going to dive all into what Jesus has for you, or you're going to run from it. And so I just think already being intentional of like, I'm going to get plugged into a church. I have a few in mind. I'm maybe going to test those out, see which one. I'm going to, figure out my class schedule, and then that's when I'm going to work in my time to read God's word. And I just think it's so crucial because now you're living on your own. And I just think it's super important in that time of our lives to be intentional with God. So that's so good. And then last question, this is a little bit of a topic change, but you've shared about losing your mom. And so how has that hardship, terrible thing that happened, drawn you closer to God?
Yeah, for me, I had, prior to my mom passing, a very surface level understanding of Christianity, kind of what I talked about earlier, and then also a very surface level relationship with Jesus. So after she passed away, I had to learn to depend on God in a very deep way that I had never had to depend on Him before. And just like walking through that with all of the questions that I had, I really had to trust God, and I didn't for a long time. Because I didn't understand how God could use such a terrible thing for His glory. And I think even with just everything that's happened with my speech and everyone getting to hear about Jesus because of God speaking through me, God's proven Himself once again. It's like every time I doubt Him, He's like, here you go.
Just kidding. Watch this.
Literally. So I've learned to trust God because like He used my mom passing away for His glory. So He can, like in my life, I feel like He can use anything for His glory if I just let Him. And that's just being willing to put my yes on the table. So I've also learned a lot about that too.
Right. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. Being willing to say yes and being willing for God to use you.
Yes.
As I was watching your speech, like trying to watching a couple of your interviews, just trying to learn more about you, I have a list of topics that I want to talk about at Honey in the Rock. And I'm like, I really like this topic. I really like this topic. But often I just find a guest, and I'm like, this person I would love for people to hear because they're so wise. I just need this person to be heard. But as I was listening to yours, I was like, I already have the guest down. I just, and I was like, I won't have a topic. It'll just happen. But over and over again, I just kept thinking of this thing. It was on my list, and it was being all in for Jesus, and then all in for how Jesus is going to use you. So cool. And then that's what you keep saying, and I didn't tell you that. And I was like, that is such a God thing. Because I probably wrote these questions like maybe a month ago, and that's what I wrote down at the bottom of the page. And that was just so cool. That's what you keep bringing up, and those are the topics I keep praying over. But just like I think it's easy to be like, I'm all in for Jesus. Like, go Jesus, yay! Like, Christianity, go to heaven,
Right.
woohoo. But then being all in for how he's going to use you,
Yes.
meaning that your mom's going to pass away
Mm-hmm.
and he's going to pull you through this, and then you're going to have this graduation speech, and you're going to all these things, and it's going to lead to God getting so much glory.
That's right.
And being all in for how he's going to use you, even when that's not fun.
Mm-mm.
That's not ideal. You know,
Right.
like, God, I would have given you the glory if you didn't make that happen. But instead, he was like, no, this is what's going to happen, and watch this.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, what?
Yeah.
Thousands of people just heard how I proclaimed Jesus. And so that is just such a cool little God moment.
Yeah, for real.
I try to look for God winks of just like the little things of like, this is makes your faith stronger, and little things like that. I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. But I am so honored that you're here, and I'm so glad to meet you. And I feel like now our paths are gonna cross.
Oh, I hope so.
I feel like they are.
They will.
So thank you for being on.
Of course.
Thank you so much
for having me.
You had to say anything else?
I mean, honestly, I feel like we talked about so much.
I know.
And I really, that's so cool, like being all in for Jesus, and like, that's kind of what we talked about.
Yes.
So, I don't know, I think I would just encourage everyone to remember that no matter what you go through, God can use the good and the bad, so let him, and, you know, be all in for Jesus.
Yes,
So.
that's so good. You know when you have something in your head and you're like, I'm about to say that?
Yeah.
This was why that should happen. I'm sure it wasn't important.
It's okay.
But anyways, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you guys for listening. See you next Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.